lot of people these days will never understand just how truly bizarre McDonald's playgrounds used to be in the 80s. It was a marriage of the trippy universe of Willy Wonka and the happy-go-lucky freak show that was the advertising campaign of the Golden Arches. They had metal slides, swings, and spinning rides that were maybe just a few degrees less hot than the surface of the sun. It was a fantasy playground, covered in burger grease, smudge marks, and more than the occasional bratty kid hogging every ride out there. This madness was such a blast, though, that it would require multiple requests from your drained parents to finally drag you out of there to leave for home. However, with the amount of joy kids got from these places, it makes you wonder why they went away. Were they too costly to maintain? Did McDonald's just want to distance themselves a bit from kids in general? Or maybe they were hiding something. Before we get into it, you have to understand the types of equipment that were out in these playgrounds. There was a Grimace prison cell. That's right, in this ominous half-creature, half-jail playground apparatus, Grimace used to force many innocent kiddies to remain stuck in a fully functioning prison cell during the scorching hot afternoon. Sounds like a great time at the playground, right? And that wasn't all. There was actually another type of jail on the playground, one that was modeled after Officer Big Mac. With this one, a kid would basically climb up inside of its head, and about half the time get stuck in there with another half dozen sweaty, often bleeding children, blocking them from escaping. Just a truly wild time. However, the strangest thing about this equipment, believe it or not, was not what occurred during the day in there. It was what happened overnight. See, these things were for the most part cleaned at closing before the restaurant would shut down. And yet it seemed that when employees would come the next day, managers often found disgusting messes inside of these things, mostly with traces of blood, which no one could explain. The restaurant managers usually assumed some kid had a gash knee the day before, or something, and they just missed it cleaning up. Well, according to one manager at a restaurant in New Jersey, there may have been something else much more sinister going on. See, there were these strange middle-aged men who used to frequent their playground throughout all hours of the day. They had been kicked off the premises several times, but others would always show up in their place soon after. His best guess for why they would frequent his store was because he was right on the edge of a heavily wooded area that they were likely living in. They would order food sometimes too, a burger without the meat, just the cheese, and they would add an incredible amount of ketchup. That was how the manager started to catch on to this group's activities. An employee named Kevin Wilcox claimed that he showed up a couple hours early for his morning shift one day and figured he would just sleep in his car until it started. Well, this turned out to be a very bad idea for him. He was parked in the front of the building, so had no possible view of the playground, but he was startled when he saw some dark figure walk out from the woods and head to the back of the building where the playground was. Too curious to just let it slide, Kevin got out of his car and slowly crept around the side of the building. What he eventually saw occurring on the playground was truly bizarre and disturbing. There were a bunch of middle-aged men carrying knives and playing on the playground equipment, which would have been bad enough if they weren't also completely covered in ketchup. Kevin shuddered in fear as he ducked into some nearby bushes and watched the group of depraved individuals run around and play on the equipment maniacally. That was when he noticed the Officer Big Mac jail. There were 3 children tied up inside, their mouths covered so that they couldn't scream. Another one of the kids was hanging, seemingly unconscious, from the Hamburglar statue out on the playground. His hands were tied up out to his sides, like he'd been crucified. Horrified and at a total loss as to what to do, he snuck out of the bushes and quietly tried to make his way back to his car. Since this was the 80s and he didn't have a cell phone, he decided his best course of action was to try and possibly drive to a payphone to call the police. That also turned out to be a bad idea. By the time he got back to the car, one of the men was standing by it, holding a long, jagged, ritualistic-looking knife. The man was very tall and his face painted totally white. Kevin immediately ran past the car and off into the pitch-black woods. After running for several minutes, he eventually came across this bizarre old playground equipment, surrounded by McDonald's memorabilia. He also noticed it was connected to an old abandoned school. Kevin ran into the school to try and hide from the man chasing after him. And inside, he found evidence of a little community. Tents, a kitchen, and weirdly, there was a Ronald McDonald costume, with the wig and everything hanging on the back wall. He came across a strange Jimmy rigged TV VCR combo that was somehow still pulling some power from the building. The weirdest thing was, though, up on the shelf there was a tape inside of a beautiful glass display box. He took it down and popped it in the VCR, and what began playing was truly disturbing. It was some weird Ronald McDonald training video from the early 70s, where Ronald was dancing and jumping around. Only it wasn't the exact Ronald we all know. It was sort of a precursor to the modern day one, which looked even more strange. At first, the character was inside of a McDonald's kitchen. He started grabbing buns and burgers and just throwing them onto the grill haphazardly. Then he would pick them up and flip them around the room as he screamed and laughed maniacally, taking ketchup and pouring almost an entire bottle onto each of the buns. Then he would put a single piece of cheese and close them up. The tape then showed Ronald walk the cameraman into the back freezer, and with a wide-mouthed, toothy smile, slowly he pulled the freezer open, revealing numerous frozen, dead bodies. Then he just started screaming with joy, which shook Kevin up a bit. And that was when he noticed that the Ronald McDonald costume, which had been hanging up on the back wall, was missing. Then, as he turned back toward the TV, the tall man who had been chasing him before was standing there in front of him, dressed as Ronald McDonald. His horrifying white face lit only by the light of the TV. Before Kevin could move, Ronald brought the knife down onto him, slashing at his arms and chest. But luckily, he was able to grab the TV stand and knock it onto Ronald as he tore out of the building. He ran deeper into the woods until he eventually came out the other side into a shopping mall parking lot in front of a Dillard's. Ecstatic, he found a payphone and ran towards it to call the police. Eventually, they came to pick him up and went back to the scene of the crime to investigate. While they did not find any of the cult members at the McDonald's playground, they did find the abandoned school out in the woods where they had been living, which led them to the videotape. It turns out that the tape was also evidence in a string of killings which happened in the 70s with one of the early Ronald McDonald characters who worked for the company and killed 10 of his co-workers one day during his shift. None of those cult members were ever seen again after that day, so they must have relocated to a totally different McDonald's or maybe another type of establishment entirely. So while they were very fun as a kid, I have to say I'm glad that McDonald's playgrounds are no longer a thing. Very, very glad for that. Hey, it's Mr. Freaky. Hope you enjoyed that original Creepypasta. What's your favorite sandwich from McDonald's? Leave it in the comments and let's discuss. Also, if you would like to support the channel, please consider becoming a member by clicking the join button. It would really help me to create more videos in a timely fashion. Have a horrific evening, everyone, and remember to stay spooky, my friends.